Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you all today. And thank you for joining. So I have the honor of opening track two. Yeah, I'm very excited to share all of these ramblings with you all. My talk is titled Solving Puzzles in Assembly and on the Rock. And it's funny how it came up because I was a climber before being a malware analyst. And therefore, I have been rambling within myself for a long time about all the commonalities between like malware analysis and rock climbing, which I'm going to share with you all today. So in my day-to-day job, I do some OSINT and some incident response. But obviously, when the night comes and when the weekend comes, I dedicate myself to malware analysis, reverse engineering, and I absolutely love assembly. And then whenever, I take some time off of the screen, I love to go to a rock climbing gym, to real rock, and just use my body in and my mind, honestly, in very, very similar ways as I do in my malware analysis process to accept, the goal becomes just to move your body on the rock and reach a certain goal. So what's a game plan for today? First approach to malware and to climbing can be confusing, can be incredibly scary. And that's how both of the processes start to get together a little bit. And I'm going to present all of these in a bit of parallel so that the similarities become even more evident. Then we get to the first pointer. So where do we start? Once we got scared and confused, where are we starting from? What are those basic pieces that we have to put together in order to create our climbing flow or our workflow when it comes to malware analysis? Then we start making new friends. And so we start talking about tooling a little bit and look at where really we can start from to dig into our analysis and understanding the climbing holds and what the possibilities are when it comes to climbing, as well as the types of movement that are involved. We go a little bit beyond the basics and dig a bit more into stack registers and basic assembly. And we learn a bit how to project in climbing, which means essentially going from start to finish, like seeing the climb, planning for it. And that's pretty much the same thing that we do in malware analysis. How are we going to get from point zero to the end of the game and get the information that we want? And then we're going to talk a little bit about mindset, because both in malware analysis and in climbing, mindset is extremely important. There's a lot of failure involved, which in climbing translates into falling. And sometimes it can be challenging to keep up your motivation. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that aspect and then some interesting takeaways. So yes, your first approach, OMG. When I first opened Ghidra in my life, I was like, oh, maybe I'm not going to do this, among all the InfoSec careers, and maybe I'm not going to do this. And I had the same reaction the first time I stepped into a climbing gym, because as you can see, it can be incredibly overwhelming. There is so much information on the wall and in a disassembler, for example, that sometimes it can be really, really hard and challenging to understand where to go, because you're like, okay, like I see all of this stuff, but where do I start from? So that's how we get to the first pointers. So I'm gonna try and zoom in a little bit so you all can see a bit better what I'm displaying here. So when it comes to malware, we definitely want to start from static properties. And that's what we usually do with something like P Studio. So basically, we're talking about Windows malware. and 32-bit malware. And so if we drop our sample into PStudio, we can see some interesting characteristics of the sample. So obviously the hashes, the 5 hashes are very important because they allow us to cross-check and see if that sample was already seen by anyone else in tools like VirusTotal and similar. So the hashes are being a fixed value strings that represent, the contents of the file are generally unique with very few exceptions, which we're not going to touch on today. And as said, we can cross-check for those into specific tools to see if there are any other information, because at this point, we just start blindly analyzing the sample. Then we have the MZ, which is, it stands for Mark, and I hope I'm pronouncing this well, Zbikowski, which was one of the leading developers of MS-DOS. This essentially identifies a portable executable. Then what we want to look at is the entropy level. The entropy level can reveal to us a little bit about how and whether the malware was packed or not. So whether we're going to have a little more challenges when it comes to, seeing APIs and import tables and strings and things like that, or if it's just going to be, okay, if the entropy is low, it's usually like an unpacked piece. So we're going to have a little less difficulty. And then we're going to move a little bit to the right to look at the import table. Now, the import table is probably the most important piece, or at least for me in my analysis, is the most important piece of the puzzle, because it really tells me where I should start from over the next steps. So what it contains is essentially API calls, API application programming interface, and it's the way that the piece of malware interacts with the operating system. And so this can tell us a little bit about where to go next, about where do we find the hook to really start our analysis, because these APIs are all, or most of them, I should say, are well documented on the Microsoft website. So we can just, do a quick search and we will find out everything. So like what kind of parameters they get, what kind of return values we should expect based off of whether, the function call succeeded or not. So this, to me, is usually the biggest piece of information that I gather from static properties analysis. And again, this is PStudio. Obviously, there are a number of other tools that you all can use and check for, but we're going to stick to this for now. And then another piece of information that we can find within PStudio is information about sections. And this, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Again, it is very important when it comes to packing, because we can look at the difference between raw size and virtual size. So raw size is essentially the size on disk of the executable, and virtual size is the size of the piece in memory. So if these two sizes differ by a lot, then it's most likely that the sample is packed. And so it's going to be a little more challenging. Most likely it is going to have a very small import address table. We can also, look at the section hash, which also gives you a little more insights into, whether that piece of code has been reused in other pieces of malware. Now we switch gears and we go to the first pointers in climbing. So where do we start when we see, after we've seen that crazy wall with a lot of different colors and things? So straight arms. And I should say, this is my significant other, and he graciously posed for a lot of these pictures. So when we start a climb, or when we start thinking about how to climb a piece of rock or plastic, we should start really focusing on using big muscles, because what we want from climbing is efficiency. So we want to essentially get the best result with a minimum effort and rely on the big muscles. So shoulder muscles when it comes to upper body, and a lot of like leg muscles when it comes to like pushing our body up. So straight arms, the first time you climb, you're probably going to climb like this a little bit. So this is the way you don't want to climb. And when it comes to, you know, when you start progressing, then you understand how much easier it becomes if you just keep your arms straight. So that is climbing 101. Again, your body is going to feel the difference, like greatly, I can assure you. If you want to try climbing and you go to a gym, just, you know, grab random holds, which as climbers we call rainbow holds, when you're not sticking to a specific color, and try hanging on to them with your arms bent as opposed to with your arms straight, and you are going to feel the difference, trust me. And then after that, what we want to focus on is feet. So sticky feet is also the name of the drill that is very popular, especially for beginner climbers. So this is what you don't want to do. As you see, this person is putting their foot on the hold, but not in a stable manner. They kind of like put it on and then readjust it, and it's kind of like bouncy and everything. This, especially in the long run, and especially as your climb gets harder, it becomes really challenging. It becomes a lot of work to having to readjust your body every time like that. And that, you know, is the same when it comes to arms and hands. The least you can readjust, the better it is for your efficiency and your flow. This is the right way to do it. This is really what we want to achieve when it comes to climbing, especially when it comes to overhang climbing, which is what's happening in this case. He is climbing on a 45-degree overhang, and you see that the foot kind of like sticks to the hold, and then it pivots to one side or the other, because he's basically working with his hips in order to get closer to the wall and to reach the next hold. So once we complete and we have an idea of these basic techniques, we can take a step further and start making new friends. And in this case, it's like malware analysis friends. So one of them that I really love to use is Procmon. Procmon is a beautiful, beautiful tool that we can use when we do behavioral analysis. So essentially, when it comes to behavioral analysis, once we have, you know, the first pointers, we are very careful about offset. So we make sure that our lab is set up properly and you have all the proper, you know, offset measures in place. And then we detonate the malware. We are going to be looking for two types of things when we do that: host-based indicators and network-based indicators. Host-based indicators are obviously on the endpoint and can be, you know, files created, registry keys, processes, a collection of persistence mechanisms, everything that can be on the host and can reveal the presence of malware, or, you know, in this case, the behavior of the piece. Procmon is a wonderful tool that essentially shows you in real time all the changes to the file system, to the registry process and thread creation activities and things like that. So, I mean, I'm not going to zoom in because this was just like an example of what running Procmon can look like. It is overwhelming. It is a lot of information. So this is a very useful recording tool for all those events. But then what we want to look at, for example, is a process tree, part of also Pacman. Because the process tree, and here I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you all can see better. The process tree shows you the parent-child relationships of all processes. So this is going to give you a lot more insights into the processes that were created, what process on what else, and the order of execution. It's also interesting to look at the lifetime column in this case. And this shows you in a graphical format a little bit of the length of each process. So for example, here, I detonated the sample called sample2.exe, and I can see here that it actually spawned for a second a different process, but then it kind of like died right away. So the lifetime column can tell us a little bit more about that. And then we can move forward. And so basically, what we can do when it comes to Pacman is record the malware activity when we detonate it, and then we can visualize it with a tool like Perotti, which I really, really like, because first of all, Pacman filters are pretty tricky to deal with. And therefore, having a tool that just like maps out everything and most of the activity, at least, that Pacman shows you, it was pretty cool. So when I found out this tool, I'm like, I'm never going to give this up. And let me zoom in a little bit. So here you can see a little bit of everything that happens. So a file, this is obviously like your first process. This is your sample, your bbot.exe. And then this sample gets to create a file and drop it in this folder, brb-config.tmp. And then there's a collection of registry keys, especially there is up here an auto start. So I'm like, interesting, could that be a persistence mechanism? So yeah, basically with Perotti, we can really have a good idea, a little more in depth of what the malware does. And we can obviously, make notes of all of that and consider them indicators of compromise. Then we can move forward to network-based indicators. So at the same time as we fire up our malware in one side of the lab, we can also run tools like Wireshark to capture network-based indicators, so like communications activities. We want to capture full packets with Wireshark so that we can really dig deeper into packet content and everything. It's not obviously the only network tool that we can use. We could use Fiddler, for example. We could use even Burp Suite to capture HTTP communications and things like that. But Wireshark is usually a good base to start from. And so when we look at a little bit of a packet capture, in this case, we're looking at a DNS query. And we can see that samples that I showed you before in Perotti is actually sending a DNS query and trying to, find out where this domain is located. And right after that, it is actually sending a GET request. So we're going to see a DNS request and an HTTP request down here. And the full URI down here with everything that, interestingly enough, gets sent through that request. So after that, I think we're going to have, because these are also going to be indicators of compromise. So at this point, ideally, and when I say ideally, I mean that it sometimes happens. A lot of the times it doesn't happen because threat actors are sneaky and they don't want us to find out information in such an easy way. So, but a few times, and especially if you're just starting out, samples are going to be targeted to, for learning. So you're going to have the opportunity to just like detonate the piece and see what happens by just like analyzing and capturing the different data, whether that's host-based or whether that is network-based. Another option that we have is emulation. So this is another tool that I really like. It is called Kappa. And I believe it was created by the Flare team, but don't quote me on that. So Kappa is a Linux tool that detects capabilities in executable files. So essentially, it works with all types of executables or even shellcode. And it tells you what it thinks that the program can do. The really neat feature of Kappa is also that it tells you, not only your basic information, but also the correlations and what it sees when it comes to the MITRE attack framework. So it maps out what it thinks that your piece of malware can do to the MITRE attack framework. And that obviously is huge, as I'm sure a lot of you know, in terms of detection and creating detection rules and all the cool things like that. We also have for Kappa a verbose option that is going to dig even deeper and tell us even in more detail what kind of things this piece of malware is doing. So it's like connecting to a certain HTTP address, as well as setting command line arguments, deleting files, creating files, and it's going to get down to the real details of all of that. Even in some cases, you can get down to the single API calls, and it will also tell you at which memory addresses in the pieces those calls are used. So yeah, really interesting tool. Again, as all the emulators, there's Kappa, there's Speakeasy, there's a number. They don't always work, but why not give it a shot? It's gonna take you like less than a minute to run it, especially if it's a normal size piece. Okay, now we switch gears and we look at making new friends in climbing. So let's look at handholds first. We want to get familiar with the different type of handholds because there are various techniques to be able to hold on to them. And so we can start seeing here what we climbers call a jug. A jug is usually the easier hold to hang on to. As you can see, like most of your hand is on the hold. And therefore, if you step into a climbing gym and start looking at the different options for climbing, you're going to see a lot of these. This is a sloper, harder to hang on to, much harder. It's, as you can see, like slopey, and there's not a lot to hang on to. It works essentially by friction as opposed to finger strength. Pinches are very interesting holds, which I hate a little bit. But yeah, you just like pinch your hold. There can be, different sizes for these. So they also really depend on how big your hand is. So that's why I have very small hands. So I'm not a big fan of pinches. What I love though are pockets. Obviously, they speak by themselves. They're probably close pockets, and these are both crimps are probably the hardest holds to hang on to. These are more like, okay, doable even for beginner level climbing. These are like, oh, okay, we're getting to a hardcore part. And at the same time, we look at footholds too. So we can see toe, your typical, frontal toe hold. Also very important to just use the tip of your foot as opposed to, sometimes, especially when you're just starting out, you want to put your whole foot on there, and it's just not possible. It's not efficient, trust me. The edge, so you can use your internal or external edge, or you can smear. Sometimes you don't have footholds, and that's a very real thing that can happen. And so you use whatever you can have in order to hang on. Okay, let's move beyond the basics. So let's start looking at registers. What is a register? Registers are the smallest data holding elements that are built into a CPU. So this is a 32-bit these are 32-bit general purpose registers. I am not going to get into detail about what each of these registers does. I'm just going to tell you that EAX is usually one of the main registers used, especially for return values from functions. I am also going to mention ESP and EBP. ESP, the stack pointer. So essentially, it looks at what's on the top. It marks what's on the top of the stack. And the base pointer, also called frame pointer, marks the beginning of a function on the stack. So essentially, registers hold the instructions or operands that are currently being processed. They're just like information holders. And at the same time, once we talk about registers, we can start talking about basic assembly instructions. And sorry, here I'm gonna go a little bit quicker than I should, but there's a lot to cover in order to get real deep into these kind of topics. So, okay, so what we want to look at in general, or the most important commands are the ones that I highlighted, but really we want to look at the move instruction that copies the source to the destination. In this case, I think they are switched up. Actually, apologies for that. But anyway, move instruction copies values. Add instruction obviously adds values. Push and pop instructions, the push instruction pushes some type of value to the stack. The pop instruction actually removes it. And then we have the more complicated ones, the comparisons, conditionals, and jumps. So sorry to go real quick here, but there's a lot to cover. And I'm gonna tell you the meaning of each instruction once we get to really look at a piece of assembly. Then, so moving beyond the basics, we have our glorious pancake stack, because we talked about the stack and the registers, and the stack is the other big information folder that we can find. So first of all, the stack is last in, first out type of mechanism. So essentially, it is this giant, imagine it as a giant vertical information folder that grows towards lower memory addresses, and you can see it kind of grows upward, but you can actually represent it in a million different ways. So essentially, we can tell a program calls a function, and what happens at that point around the function call when it comes to the stack. This happens. So this happens right before the function call. So in a 32-bit executables, parameters get pushed to the stack. And so we can see them here. After that, the return address, when the call actually happens, so imagine here in your assembly code, there's a call, and the return address, which is the memory address immediately after your call instruction gets pushed here. And then on top of that, this is the result of part of the function prologue. So push, it's in assembly, you will see in the function a push EBP instruction. And this will mark the stack frame. So the portion of the stack that is assigned to that specific function. And then consequently, a number of local variables, as many as the function needs, are going to also be pushed here. And so in the end, you're going to find all of that information on the stack, as well as, you know, your stack pointer, which points to the last information pushed to the stack. Moving on. So once we know about stack and registers, along with the information that we have from our static properties analysis, we can start digging a little bit deeper into assembly code and into validating what we think, what we hypothesize this could happen, looking at our, for example, like the import address table and looking at our data from behavioral analysis. So we start really putting all the pieces together. So for example, in this case, we want to start from the API calls that we found in the through BStudio or any other static property analysis tools. So in this case, we had seen regopen key XA. And so the hypothesis that we create is that, hey, maybe this malware creates some sort of persistence mechanism. But at the same time, sorry, I'm going to go back for a second. If we don't know what that API does, as I said, we can look it up on the Microsoft website and see a little bit of type of parameters and what those are in particular. And, oh, sorry, a little bit too zoomed in. What those parameters do, as well as return values that we should expect. So if we don't know what that is, it's pretty easy to just like look it up on Microsoft's reference. So once we have an idea of what we should expect, that's when we dig into the assembly code. And so this is represented in Ghidra, and we can see, so we can open the symbol references and the symbol table, type up the name of the API, and if it finds it, here we go. So we're gonna see this, if we double click on this memory address, down here, this is where we're going to land in the disassembler field. So we can clearly see the function call. And at that point, if we looked up what the parameters actually represent, and here Ghidra really helps us look a little bit deeper into what is which and which is which. And we can see that these all get pushed to the stack. And this is a really interesting find. So if we double click on that, it's a string value, we're gonna land down here. And here we are, software Microsoft Windows current version run. So this is really what we were looking for. It is one of the techniques that, you know, we can use to really put all the pieces together, because at that point, if that was our hypothesis was around persistence, then, you know, we have it. Okay, that's validated. Also, we can see Locky down here. So that can be an interesting clue for, you know, further analysis, or, you know, hey, maybe that's a hint to what exactly this thing does. All right, now we switch up to climbing, going beyond the basics. So this is yours truly. When we go beyond the basics with climbing, we want to start talking about, again, putting all those pieces together and movement types. So it can be counterintuitive to talk about static climbing and static movement, but it represents it real well when you look at the style of it, because it's slow and steady, and it's a lot about balance and technique. It's normally used when it comes to slab climbing or vertical or near vertical climbing. Usually holds are very small. And there's not a lot to hold on to. You might have to smear against a wall with your foot when there's no footholds. And it is the goal here is precision. and yeah, very slow movement. Another type is more dynamic climbing. So in dynamic climbing, at least two of the points of contact to the wall come off. So in this case, you see that he is latching onto this upper hold and his feet cut off the wall. And so for this, he needs like a big push up of his feet. And then third, and the more spectacular that sometimes is called more parkour than climbing, is called a dyno. A dyno is normally when all points of contact are off the wall. So you just like jump and all of the points of contact between your body and the wall are off. So it's just a jump. You have to do it at times, even outdoors, even though this type of climbing is more normal when it comes to, competition climbing and bouldering in this case. But it can be definitely found outdoors as well. And then also when it comes to climbing technique, and especially climbing on overhangs, what we want to do really beyond thinking about basic type of movements is leading with your feet and hips. So here I was just doing, a pretty easy overhang climb on the 45 wall. And if you can notice, I just try and use my feet a lot because it's a lot of work for my upper body to go up the wall like that. And so I use a foot, I pivot on the foot, and I use my hip to like carry a lot of my weight on. Reason why it is incredibly important to have decent core strength when you want to do something like this. It's funny because normally people say, oh, I can't climb. I don't have, a lot of upper body strength. And I'm like, well, consider you might actually not need as much, because here I try to keep my arms as straight as possible. So rely on the bigger shoulder muscles and the core, because that's what really keeps you on the wall when it comes to overhangs. It allows you to avoid cutting feet and things like that. Okay, so now we have a little bit of an idea of all the tools and processes, and I hope you're starting to see like all the similarities that are between malware analysis and climbing. So let's talk for a second about mindset. Whoa, it's scary and it can get extremely frustrating. Especially, when you're dealing with hard code, when you're dealing with obfuscated and packed and whatnot, and XORs and encryption and etc. So start small, like start your learning process, start your workflow from little pieces, from relatively easy pieces. But in the end, you're going to have to lean into the discomfort, because that's really the only way you are going to learn. Learn especially how to use the import address table efficiently, because that's going to help you out a lot. And learn how all those APIs intersect between each other and how they work together in order to create the malware behavior. And listen, if necessary, just quote unquote step into everything. We have not seen debuggers because I figured it would be way too much of a talk. I feel like it was already a bit of a stretch to dig into, registers and stack. And I hope I gave people enough information about that, but definitely feel free to hit me up on Slack later if you have any questions. And so if necessary, really go step by step in a debugger, figure that all of those tiny pieces out. And ultimately, just like be patient with yourself, because it takes time. It is not an easy process, and it takes quite a bit of time. And the mindset in climbing, falling, there's a lot of that. There's a ton of falling and trying again, and again. Like these are actually 3 different attempts that I filmed. And if we go here, so this is how you normally project a move. When you get really stuck onto your move, you just try and get up to it and only try that single move. So you can use obviously like nearby climbs and easier holds, because you really have to focus on that one move and try it over and over and over until you vomit sometimes. No, I don't recommend getting to that point. But the whole point of the question of this type of situation is reframing your mindset from failing / falling to learning. And again, it's a lot about patience, because there are people who naturally maybe tend to give up a little more easier and everything. But if you really want to get to the top of that climb, you've got to keep going. And the same is with malware analysis. And that's how we get to our takeaways, because they are the same takeaways for both. Failing is learning, because every time you quote unquote fail or you fall off the wall, you're actually learning what the wrong approach is. So that is an opportunity for you to readjust your method, your workflow, your everything, and try a new approach. Maybe try a different move. Maybe focus, like literally when you're climbing, focus on your hips. That's the thing that whenever I'm climbing with someone and they're maybe frustrated because they can't get past a certain point, that's what I tell them: focus on your hips, especially if it's an overhang. There is a 95% probability that that is going to be how you like crack your code when it comes to climbing. Efficiency comes through repetition. So the more you do it, the more you're going to get better at it. And consistency, like don't just go once and then, drop off and, just be like, it's not for me. Like efficiency and success, quote unquote, depending on what we define as success, but honestly, just like fun comes and through repetition. The more you do it, the more you're going to get better at it. And the more consistent you are, the higher you're going to get. You only quote unquote lose if you give up. There's no such thing as like general failure when it comes to malware analysis and climbing. You only kind of like lose a little bit of a battle if you decide to totally give up. But listen, not telling you like keep going until you vomit, like seriously. No. Take your time, like take your time off. Feel what your body and your brain tell you, because again, I'm talking both about malware analysis and climbing. If you need to take a step back from either of the processes, please do, and take a few days off and think about something else, and maybe go do some other fun activities, but then go back to it and keep grinding until you get where you want to get. Because as Reinhold Messner, who's a longtime mountain climber, and he was the first person to climb Everest without supplemental oxygen, alpine style, as they say it. It's always further than it looks. It's always taller than it looks, and it's always harder than it looks. So be prepared, but keep in mind that the best view comes after the hardest climb. And at the same time, the best results in terms of your malware analysis work are going to come after you finally overcome all the challenges from analyzing the hardest samples. So I hope you all like this. And thanks to everybody at PancakesCon, the whole like amazing crew, all the people who are working behind the scenes to keep this going. And yeah, it was really fun to be able to share this with you all.